Hello and welcome to the Burdens of Draco podcast, where we talk comics, stories, and the process of comic making. I'm Mica, the writer and creator of Burdens of Draco, and with me is Karissa, the dynamite artist for Burdens of Draco, and Matt Henderson, the talented co-writer of The Archives. Thank you for joining us. In today's podcast, we are going to share a bit about who we are, what influences our storytelling, what you can expect for the future of Burdens of Draco, give concrete story timeline, and answer some fan questions. So let's dive right in. Karissa, you could say hi now. She's in Houston.
Hello.
And Matt is in Cincinnati. Go ahead and say hello.
Hey.
All right. So I had a good question for you both. I will answer it as well. Some of these are for all of us. Some of them are for some of us. But this first one is going to break Karissa's heart. She already told me it's impossible to answer. Tell me your life story in 1 minute.
I still resent you for this. I've been agonizing like all day, and I've decided how I will answer. So because I'm not quite 24 years old, I've spent most of my life at this point in school. So I'm going to eliminate those 16 years from my life and then separate my life into pre and post education.
Wow.
So
okay.
Before being educated, I told stories and I played in the dirt. And after being educated, I tell stories and I play in the dirt, but with the added weight of crushing responsibility.
Oh my gosh.
That's a great answer.
You went way over your time limit.
Oh, come on.
She had to explain her answer first.
You should have just stuck with I play in the dirt.
I'll keep it in mind for next time I have to answer this.
Oh, next time I'll find another question that's impossible to answer. Matt, do you want to tell me your life story in a minute?
Sure. I'm slightly older than 26. I'm not so far off that I don't remember what 26 was like. But in a minute, I didn't agonize over this. I only agonized over the fact that so much has happened in my life. It's hard for me to cram it into 1 minute. So, I'll just have to say that I spent the majority of my life, I'd say the first 14 years in New York, and then I moved around a lot. My dad bounced from job to job, and then I settled in Ohio and ended up going to school here, living here, met my wife and married here, and I've pretty much been hanging out in Ohio for 3/4 of my life. So I've been out of school for quite a long time. But yes, I would have to second the dirt thing.
Yes. You play in the dirt too?
Yeah, I play in the dirt.
All right. Well, I do not play in the dirt.
What?
No, I play in the grass more so. So my life story in a minute. Let's see. This is a hard one.
I told you.
Oh, surprise.
Right?
I knew it was coming. All right. So I grew up in South Bend until I was 8. But I was pretty nerdy my whole life, really into playing with Batman action figures, all the superhero 90s shows, all that stuff. And then went to college here, moved to Kansas for a little while, did the RD thing at a college, and that's where I wrote the comic. And now I'm here, and a lot happened in between there.
Yeah. I was going to start fading in music like they do at the Oscars.
Oh, yeah. Time to stop.
Time to get off stage.
Okay, so now that we've broken the ice a little bit,
It's broken.
yeah, it's far from even It's not even ice anymore. It's more like water. So let's jump into the water. Why did you join the Burdens of Draco project? And this time I'll go Matt first, and then Karissa will switch on this.
All right. Well, I'll take this one. My initial reaction was because Mica seemed desperate. No, seriously. So for me, kind of like Mica, I've been telling stories for a long, long time. Just like writing was a pretty big outlet for me. And during a lot of portions of my life, I just, I was big into role-playing games. And so I liked to, write all that stuff out. But then I started, just writing crazy fiction just for the fun of it. But when I met Mica the first time and started hearing him talk about Burdens of Draco, for me, kind of the biggest appeal to it was one, when I'm writing something that's for me, I know everything that's going on with it. And in this case, I'm still learning what's going on in the universe of Burdens of Draco. And, that was kind of exciting. But not to get too into the weeds, knowing kind of, the inspiration for Burdens of Draco, it kind of makes it easier for me to be able to, work within that realm. I don't even know how you would want to say that, but the idea of being able to write, I like science fiction. So the idea of being able to write, in a world that had already been established and, but needed like the little holes filled in here and there. That was kind of fun because in that case, as a writer, you're not like tasked with, okay, there's so much going on and you need to write all of it. It's like you can pinpoint this one thing. And what's been nice about working with Mica on it is that he's pretty flexible with kind of what I'm writing. A lot of those little details haven't all been fleshed out. And so it's just kind of nice to be able to just throw little things in there and, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember when I called you and asked you to do it, you had to have me like kind of flesh out exactly what I wanted because you didn't want to jump into something that you weren't sure if you could produce something good. So I'm really excited for people in this chapter too that you helped out with the archive entries.
Yeah, and I'm not so much worried about whether it's good. It's just whether or not it's useful.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's part of the fear of writing in a world that I don't know all about. It's not from my brain. I'm writing from a world that's in your brain, and getting in there is scary enough as it is. But trying to send stuff that's useful. But like I said, because I kind of know the base story, you've fleshed it out enough for me that it's just kind of gives me the freedom to be able to write within those parameters, which has been kind of nice.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. All right, Karissa, why'd you join? Why are you here?
Yeah, really. Am I also allowed to say it was because you're desperate? No.
Sure.
There are probably a lot of factors that played into why I signed up for this crazy journey. I think the one that I really want to focus on is that there's this feeling that I don't know if everyone experiences, but it's when you've got this story on your brain, in your heart, and you just have this aching compulsion to tell everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's actually keeping you alive because God forbid you die without telling anybody the story that you have. But it's not enough to just say it. You've got to tell it in the most excellent way possible. So it's this horrible, wonderful, kind of obscure thing. But when I talked to Mica for the first time about this, I saw that feeling inside of him. And it's the same one that I have had so many times in my life. And so suddenly I was just like, whatever it takes to help you set your story free, I'll do it.
Yeah.
I will absolutely do it. And that was over a year ago now, which I can hardly believe.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You've taken so much of my life away from me.
Oh, there's more to come.
I know. I signed up for like the next 2 decades.
Oh, for the love. That's funny.
Listeners, that's an exaggeration. We will not take 2 decades to finish this, hopefully.
Well, you know what? I don't know, because you've got like 3 volumes locked away in your noggin, so we'll see.
Well, we'll see where that goes. We're just going to work on the one.
It's about all my little heart can handle.
Yeah, it's really good to hear that, because I remember when I think we did Google Hangout for the first time. Yeah. I met you, and you had drawn out some concept characters that I had asked you to draw, and I basically spent like almost 2 hours going through every part of the story, and you listened to all of it, and I was just like blown away that you would sit there and try and keep up with all of the story.
You got the added bonus of Mica actually reading it to you. Like, he just threw me a whole bunch of documents and said, call me in the morning.
I didn't read it. I just spewed it. And then a week later or so, after we had like done a whole contract thing, and well, even before that, before she agreed to do it, she read the script, and it took her like 2 days and she was done, and she blasted through it. So that was super encouraging, just because for me, investment in the story and having a full understanding of every chapter really makes a difference in writing each chapter. Because if you only read part of a story and say, I like this, I want to do it, and you never read the whole thing, you don't have the overall picture. And I've really seen Karissa's work show even some future things, and really pretty much every time I turn around and say, hey, can you draw this or can you draw that, she nails it pretty quickly because she understands what's going on in the story.
Oh, you flatter me. I do remember that moment when I turned the script back to you, because I read the whole thing, and then I also, like an honor roll student, gave you notes on the first chapter.
I was thinking to myself, she obviously just graduated from IWU. Like, she's still in school mode for sure. But it was awesome. Just, I remember you saying, like, sending me a crying emoji and a happy, like, just, you were excited to read it, and not only were you just trying to blow through it, but you were actually feeling the emotions I was hoping for. And that was really cool. So I think we should dive into this, because we already touched on it slightly. And I'll answer this one, and then Matt, you can jump in.
Sure.
And Karissa, you can jump in if you want to as well. But this is more so Matt and I on this aspect. What is the archives? And so the first thing I want to say is, if you've read issue 1 and you got the digital issue, or you read through the website, you saw what was called the codex, and that's what we used to call it. And we actually changed the name for one main reason was, in my mind, is who says codex? Pretty much nobody. And I didn't want it to feel quite so far off and distant. And I thought archives, we all agreed that archives had this historical feel, this locked away history feel, which is really what it's about, is describing. And this will be much more like the codex in the past was very factual, and there'll be some entries like that, but this will be much more story driven. And that's why I brought Matt on, is because we wanted it to feel almost like a little mini novel that explains the backstory of some of these characters and some of the weapons and the things that are going on in this universe. And it was another outlet for me. Karissa mentioned earlier, I had 2 other novels in mind that I had already outlined that went in reverse order. So it was going to be Burdens of Draco, and then you go backwards, and then you go backwards again. And instead of doing that, we're going to do the archives and just kind of flesh out some of those past stories and battles and things that happened that really give insight into who these characters are. So that is the overall idea with the archives. We're planning to do 7 entries per chapter, and then when all 15 chapters are done, we'll compile those at the back of the graphic novel almost as its own mini novel. Mm-hmm. So that's the idea, and I'm really excited about it because from what Matt's written and what we've been able to do, and it's been really fun to see that come about. And if you're kind of a backstory nerd and you get into that type of stuff, you'll really like that.
And anyone who has this comic is a nerd. Absolutely
right.
Not.
That is not true. I've sold it to oh, by the way, we should mark that we are dangerously close to the 500 goal, which is a awesome thing. I mean, we started September 13th and here we are, what is today? April 11th, and we've sold almost 500. So
cool.
There's all backgrounds, from kids to parents to older people to I mean everybody, teens.
Those older people,
a lot of people that have gotten it have said, I've never read a comic before, and to hear their feedback of how they enjoyed it, that's just been crazy to me. But yeah, Matt, do you have anything else to say about the archives?
Yeah. So first of all, now that you made the comment that nobody ever uses the word codex, I'm going to attempt to use it every day, at least once.
Got it.
Now I'm going to find some ways to squeeze it in somewhere. So codex. But it for all the people that read the first book, I mean, obviously that's not where the story started. So there's stuff that happened well before, and although codex was a good word, the majority of the stuff that we're trying to write in the archives is stuff that happened before that. Not only that, but the archives will include, like Mica was saying, some backstory on certain people, certain objects, certain places. We'll touch on a lot of that. So it's a comic book, right? It's not a novel. So you don't have, 400 pages worth of blank page to write whatever you want to. And so, the good thing about the archive is that we can kind of fill in the blanks that are left. And, most of the word archive in itself, like Mica was saying, has a pretty good historical connotation. And so it gives us the ability to, without having to release whole volumes of the story backwards, we can just, with each issue, we can release, certain entries from the archives, which would hopefully they line up with the issue that we're releasing them with. What I liked to do when I first started toying with the idea of writing the archives with Mica was to look at the issue that we released first and just go back through and start picking out key concepts, key objects, key places, key people, and just, starting to write things that we didn't touch on, why this person reacted to the way they did, or why this place looks the way it does now, and all that kind of stuff. And we don't have that kind of room in a comic. We can actually flesh that out of the archive. So I think it's a pretty good way to fill in story that you don't typically get out of a comic book.
Yes. Agreed.
Yes.
And just to clarify for anyone that's listening, this is not a substitute for plot holes. This is, if you were to read the comic and not read the archives at all, we want it to be a totally finished story. This is story on top of the story.
Right.
I do not accept plot holes in my works. So.
Well, see, that's one of the things that I appreciated even before agreeing to write agreeing to help write the archives, one of the comments that I had made after I'd read the book to Mica was I'm a big novel reader. Like I enjoy reading, novels. And one of the issues that you have with a comic book is that you don't typically have the ability to flesh out, feelings and settings and backstories and stuff that you typically fill pages and pages and pages with in a novel. And after reading the first volume, I feel like the combination of what Mica was writing and what Karissa was doing in the drawings filled in so much of like the emotion that you see in people's faces would take a novel writer pages to flesh out. You know what I'm saying? Like we've all read books, we've all read, novels. Just think back at the last one you read and imagine how many pages it took to like describe a scene or describe a person's facial expressions or, what they're, doing or how they're acting. And it just feels like Karissa has such a handle on drawing emotion in people's faces that it just in a single frame and a single page, you get what novel writers would spend pages trying to write.
I'm just blushing over here.
I know, right? Which is what's nice about the archive, just to Mica's points. We're not filling in plot holes because the story is filling in the plot holes. The story is giving the plot. The illustrations are filling in a lot of the plot, and the archives are just, okay, here's some added bonus material on this, few things that happened in this issue, which is, I love being a part of that.
Yeah, and for the most part, we're concentrating the archives on things that relate to the issue you're reading.
Yes, correct.
Whereas the first issue, it was kind of my test run with that, and I wasn't sure where I was going with it at the time. And so the codex for the first issue has random stuff like description of a ship that you'll never see until way later.
Yeah.
But there were some useful things in there, like the physiology and anatomy of a Santo being, and some things like that really came into play, especially the pregnancy, since birth is such a big part of the first book.
Yes, right.
Up close and personal.
Oh yeah, that was a difficult one, trying to figure out exactly how we were going to not be super graphic with the birth, since they pretty much just open up in the middle and you yank a 12-year-old kid out of there. That can be.
Yeah, I remember what you said to me, which was, now when you read this, I promise I don't hate women. So that is the frame with which I had to move forward.
Yeah. I was trying to think of a way, and I think I told Karissa this, I was trying to think of a way to have the birthing process happen, but I didn't want babies in a war book. It just seemed like a bad mix. Just that whole...
Yeah, you're walking a fine line there between how much to show and how much to, like, you don't want to make the birthing process seem too easy.
Yeah.
Which is,
And
it's not.
we can't reiterate enough that Mica Metz does not hate women.
We should have put that as a disclaimer.
My mom's a woman. My wife's a woman.
Moving right along.
Yeah. But the big thing was I didn't want babies. I didn't want children. I wanted them to be born almost teens, because being a kid and a baby is such a fragile state. And with the genocide and the war that's happening in the book, I didn't want it to be too graphic, because one thing I was aiming for was a book that's not necessarily all ages, but that a little bit younger audience can read and their parents are comfortable with that. And so I was trying to create that, and I think that's where that came from in the first place, but it kind of evolved from there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That was great, guys. I like how you touched on the archives.
Now that we've personally attacked the author.
I don't mind. I'm used to it in our little chat space. I always come off as the nerdy guy that doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yes. Remind me the next time I talk to Maggie to say, hey, I hear you're a woman.
Here Michael likes you.
I hear Michael likes you.
So the next question that I wrote out is a Karissa, you might be able to best answer this, and then I can talk a little bit about the. I could talk a little bit about the basics of what it'll look like after you're done with the art and everything. But can we give the listeners a rough, and I mean rough, I'm not giving a solid day of when it's going to happen, but a rough timeline of when we can expect Chapter 2. And after that, I want to inform you guys of some other cool stuff if you haven't heard of what's been happening in the comic. That's really, really exciting.
All right. Well, when can you expect Chapter 2? It is the question that everyone wants the answer to, including Mica.
Yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm talking like a.
I am prepared. So
I did send you this ahead of time. I'm not that mean.
It's true. So we've made some changes to the way that we're doing things, and one of those changes is to the art. And it's not so major that you're going to think that Mica hired a different person. It's still me. And it's also not so major that you're going to think you're reading a different comic book. The only thing is that the process is a little bit more labor intensive for me now. But that being said, I promise it's so worth it. So far, I'm really pleased with how all of the art is going, how it looks, and I really can't wait to show you guys how it turns out.
It's beautiful. It's so good.
It really is far better than what we were doing in the first one. Not that the first one was bad or anything, but I think we've just been trying to step up our game in all areas. So the art is no exception. So because of that, I think we're looking at probably early summer for the release, but we will be sure and keep you updated no matter how that changes or if it changes.
Yes, but we can guarantee that Chapter 2 is coming out.
Oh, yes. I think Mica asked for a specific day and time, so Karissa, go.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to leave, actually.
No, stay. The other thing I was going to talk about is, and I've announced it before, but not everybody catches everything. My regular full-time job is social media, and so I know for a fact you have to put things out there 8 to 10 times before everybody hears it, and even then you're looking at about 50% of the audience you're going for some of the time. So I will say it again because I'm super excited about it. All 15 chapters are funded. Now, it's hard for that to kind of have a grasp to people that don't know how much comics cost. They are not cheap. Karissa is not doing this for free because it's her job. Like, this is a job for her. She perfected her art in school, and that deserves to be paid. And so per page, I pay her, and then for that first comic, we printed, and so the cheapest printer we could find that also had high quality stuff was in South Korea. So I had paid just $500 just for shipping. I mean, we're talking about some major, and that was still cheaper than anywhere in the US, by the way. But it's expensive. And so what we did was over the next 14 chapters, because we've done one. Over the next 14 chapters, every issue is going to be digital for 99 cents. And the plan is every September 13th, because that's when it came out, the previous issue will be free. So all the way up to 15, you can get the issues. And if someone you know hasn't read it, you can catch them up quick because you don't have to pay all that money for all the issues. They can catch up. And then when they get to the current one, they pay 99 cents and get right in there. I mean, that's something that I really wanted to make readily available to people, because I think we all have confidence in the story, and that if people get into it, they'll be hooked. And so I was willing to go that route. And then the other part of this plan is, once all 15 chapters are done, we're looking to kickstart a printed graphic novel of all 15 chapters put together with all those archive entries in the back, and probably some extra little tidbits as well. But that is kind of the direction we're going. And what I've really liked about this, personally, I've read a lot of comics. I didn't start till later in life, probably around high school, college, but I've read a lot since then. And I can tell you, and I know some of you are thinking, I prefer to hold it. And I totally get that. Mm-hmm. I love holding my comics. I love having them on the shelf where I can
smelling them. I like to smell them.
Yeah,
it's weird. I know.
It's not that weird. I think a lot of people like that sensory thing about having a book. But what you're getting is it's actually a time and a half less money per book for me to not print them. And once we get to chapter 15 and are done with the book, that'll be a lot cheaper in the long run. I mean, it's to break down the prices for you, that's $2,500 per book that we don't have to spend. That's a lot of money. And so that is the main reason we're doing it that way. But I just wanted to make you aware, if you didn't know, that is the plan. Digital, for some people, they prefer it because the colors are more vivid. It's hard to get those printing colors just right. I think you'll even notice, if you've read the digital, the comic book print is darker. There's some blacks that are a little too black. It was hard to get it just right, and there's some little missing details that you don't see because it's too dark.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, wink, wink. For those of you that hadn't heard yet, that's a huge deal. So I'm very excited about that. We're all on board for the journey, so we're excited to see where it takes us. I have no writing degree or background in writing or anything like that. Karissa, you have never done a comic before this one. Mm-hmm. And Matt, you have never written a novel or a comic.
One that's been sold.
Not one that's been sold.
Not one that's been sold.
Or published. So, is this a good thing? Or is this a bad thing? Or what are your guys' thoughts on this? Because I have specific ideas and thoughts about it, but I wanted to hear what your guys' thoughts were.
I think it is ultimately an excellent thing, but I'm going to start with the consequence first. The consequence is that we have absolutely no idea how anything works, and we are flying by the seats of our pants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
100% of the time. But I'm totally cool with that. Me 5 years ago would have been totally horrified, but the current me is significantly more relaxed, and I can handle this. This is good. So that's the consequence. But the good part and the best part is that we write our own rules. Mm-hmm. I confess that I don't know very much about comics, compared to Mica, at least. Most of my knowledge comes from a large sampling of webcomics, mostly in my early teen years. And webcomics are unconventional to begin with. Mm-hmm. And then my physical comic book knowledge comes from, I think, the only comics I actually own, which are a set of Archie digests that my dad would buy me in line at the grocery store. So,
a little different from Burdens of Draco.
Yeah.
Slightly.
So my experience is not vast. But I do see this as a really good thing because I know just enough. I know the rules that can't be broken, but I don't have any understanding of the self-imposed limitations that people have, like, just generally in the medium of comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are so many things that are just, you do it because it's a comic. But we don't do any of that because we don't need to. We can step outside the box really whenever we feel like it, as long as we're not, basically breaking set design rules. Like,
Yeah.
I really can't draw this way because when we print it out, you won't be able to see it. Or I can't put this much text in a small area because it looks bad. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, other than that, we can just throw it all out the window and do whatever, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to take a slightly more obscure point of view. I know, right? Because in my opinion, I don't know that it really matters that we have experience or not. From a business standpoint, yeah, it's kind of scary. You don't know what to expect. You don't know when you're talking editors, when you're talking, publishing stuff, when you're talking printing, when you're talking, going on signing tours and all that stuff. It's yes, if you don't have any experience, it's a little nerve-wracking. But from a creativity standpoint, I don't know that it matters whether or not you have any experience doing this. And for people who are listening, who are toying with the idea of creating a comic, whether or not you have a degree or whether or not you've ever done it before, I don't know that it really matters. I mean, I feel like, I believe that we've all been created with a significant capacity for creativity, and, whether you've done it before or not shouldn't affect how creative or how limited your creativity is. I mean, if you've got this, like Mica you could attest to this, and the amount of stuff that I've written, and even just the stuff that Karissa's, just napkin sketched. If you've got something that you want to get on paper, if you've got something on your mind that you want to write down, whether or not you've been to school or gotten a degree or had any experience prior to that, I don't know that it really matters. You know what I'm saying? Because I feel like somebody who has a degree in writing, they might spell words better or use better punctuation, but I can write just as well as somebody who's degreed or you know what I'm saying? I don't know that it matters one way or the other whether or not we're I feel like every human being that's created is created with some capacity for creativity, and it's just whether or not you take the opportunity to let that creativity come out is entirely up to you. I don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that level, really what you're saying is the only thing that is stopping you is basically you being afraid of the unknown.
Yeah.
And I mean, it takes us pretty much all of our lives to learn that that's no reason not to do something.
Sure.
Just because you're afraid of it. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree that when I signed on with Mica, I was terrified because I hadn't made a comic before. Like, I mean, I told him I did this like little dinky webcomic for like a project in college.
And I read it.
And he read it and I was embarrassed. But it was like, it was just this horrible fear of like, I'm not going to know what to do and I might disappoint somebody and maybe this will be too much. But it was like, if your fear is the only thing that's stopping you, then
right. But you weren't scared to the point where you weren't willing to put paper to or pencil to paper or stylus to tablet. You were scared about, is he going to like what I did or how are we going to get this out to the people who want to see it? It's like I said, it's that business. The business side of it is scary, and in that respect, you might want to have some experience in knowing how to handle all of that stuff. But from the creativity standpoint, much to what Karissa said to begin with, there's really no limitations. Like Mica said, when you sat down to write all of Burdens and Draco, it was like hours and hours worth of your time where it just started flowing out onto the page. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, It didn't matter whether or not you had a degree or whether or not you had any experience writing. It was just, you had this idea in your head and you wanted to get it all on paper. And so
Right.
You know, whether or not it's a good thing, it's, you know, I don't know that it's good or bad, or I'm just kind of indifferent to whether or not it's good or bad. It's just, it is what it is. And, you know, we enjoy doing it, whether people read it or not, you know?
Right. Right. So I think, to touch on something Karissa said that I think is why I think it's a great thing, is she was afraid of whether I would like it or not, and she had those feelings. And I think any creative is going to have those feelings to a certain extent, especially when they're putting stuff out for other people to see. But there's this, I don't have training, and nobody recognizes who I am, and this and that. And I think that pushes you to the next level. Like, I did so much research about how to write a script, how to write in general, I still watch tons of YouTube videos, read tons of articles about how to structure a story, how to do that. Like, just, it makes all the difference in my motivations of wanting to produce something that is the best possible thing I can produce. And part of that is motivated by this fear that what if people don't like it? I want them to like it. I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure they like it.
Sure.
And I think that's what, like, if you look at Karissa's comic before, yeah, it was okay, but her stuff now, like even that first comic, which she's improved head and shoulders above that with chapter 2. It's this constant feeling of I want to do it better. I want to be better, and I have plenty of room to grow because I don't have this feeling of I know everything because I wasn't taught. I had to learn it, and I think that's very valuable in us being untrained, but at the same time, on the other end of that is someone that does have training, even though they may have more of a confidence and maybe even an arrogance about it to a certain extent of, oh, I know story. But they do, and they are going to have a little bit more training and a better understanding of what makes good story structure. But I think sometimes that can limit you. And I think that's what Karissa touched on with the classic training of, if she knew all the pitfalls or specific things that have to happen in comics, she wouldn't have the freedom that she has to create. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was, you guys both touched on that really well, and I had to sum it up because that's how I am, I guess.
That's what a good podcast host does.
Yeah, I guess I am taking on the host role, aren't I? So, Matt, why don't you go first? What are your main influences that you are bringing into your writing style?
Okay, so for me, it's kind of funny because my wife and I are kind of opposite when we read books. She likes books that are straight to the point, you know, little descriptives, little, you know, fluff. It's just tell me what's going on and move on. And I'm kind of the opposite. I actually, when I read, I like authors to, you know, flesh out their characters, flesh out what their character's thinking, you know, maybe give a little backstory, blah, 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 blah. And if that takes a few chapters before they actually get to the next big plot hook, I'm totally okay with that, because when we get to the big plot hook, I kind of know what the guy's thinking. Mm-hmm. So when I write, which the listeners will get to experience that for the first time in the next issue, because I didn't get to write anything in the first. But when you see some of the stuff that was written in the archives that I actually had the opportunity to write, you'll kind of see that when I write, I like to write in such a way that you kind of feel what the character's feeling. You kind of, any author can write what the character sees and can explain a room. Anybody can do that. But, you know, for me, one of the things that influences how I write is that I want them to feel what the character feels, so that when they're seeing what the character sees, they also get some kind of emotional response. Does that make sense? So, yeah. I would say that's probably the biggest influence for me would probably be if do you want me to name, I've got authors in my head who I read who are really good at this. Yeah. But again, they probably won't. Ted Decker's a big one. He writes a lot of. I don't know that he necessarily writes sci-fi as much as he writes just fantastical type fiction. Frank Peretti. These are all people that write really good fiction, and they're really good descriptors. But like I said, most authors are pretty good at that. It's just few authors are good at doing it in such a way that you actually feel what the character you're reading about is feeling. And that's, I'm hoping that's, I'm not to give away any spoilers, but there's one particular character who I've kind of focused on. Well, I guess I could say that, right? I mean, I've kind of focused on Porter in the writings that I've done for the archives for the next issue. And so my goal with this, because Porter's a pretty integral part in the archives, mainly because
he's so
he was one of the earliest, Santos to be created. I've kind of focused on him at the beginning. And so trying to get the reader to emotionally connect with what he's thinking, with why he's fighting so hard for what he's fighting for. And so for me, my main influences are, just other writers who I've read who are really good at getting the reader to actually feel, which is, again, what I've appreciated so much about Chris's illustration style, is because she's really good at getting the reader to feel based on illustration, which is really good.
Oh, thank you.
She actually made a funny comment when she was drawing this latest issue. She said, "I feel like 90% of the time I'm drawing people that are in emotional distress."
Why does everyone seem angry or sad?
I'll go first. Let's mix it up. Or I'll go second. I'll mix it up.
It's too late to go first, Mica.
Yeah, right. Get in your time machine and go back again.
All right, I'm going to go first after that first one. So
you could always edit it so that you come before me.
Oh, true.
Oh, yeah.
I'll just edit you guys out and it'll just be me at the end.
With several awkward pauses and laughing.
Yeah, you guys will laugh and that's it.
Oh, we can be the laugh track. I've always wanted to be a laugh track.
Yes.
Well, your chance is coming. For me, oh man, there's so many influences, especially what influenced this story specifically, Burdens of Draco. Not necessarily the other two novels. They came after I wrote this. It didn't all come at once. So the archives are kind of an afterthought. They've been outlined, but anyways, so actually there's two things that are the biggest influences on Burdens of Draco and how it's written. And the first one is the Bible. I am a Christian, and so as a Christian, it's the biggest part of my life. And just like anybody else, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, there are parts of your life that are really important, and it'll bleed through into your writing. And so for me, there's a lot of just certain characters that I pulled out of the Bible and symbolism and just little story arcs and things like that that really made a huge impact on the way I was storytelling and kind of how I treated those characters. And I don't want to give anything away, so I won't go too much into why or what, because that's part of the fun of reading through these chapters. But I wanted to write a book. I have read a few Christian comics, and some of them are awesome, and some of them are definitely not. And so one thing I wanted to stay away from was this label of Christian comic. I wanted it to be accessible to everybody and not push anybody out.
Sure.
So that's why I'm very careful to say it's an influence and it's not a direct thing. There's no character that is Jesus. There's no character that is Noah. There's no character that is Samson. But there are characters that have similarities. They might have traits or some type of story arc that goes similar.
Yeah.
But that's true of any writer. You're going to find writers there is originality's kind of not a thing. Like, yes, you can have an original idea, but you can't create a completely original script.
Yeah.
If you use, I heard something today, I heard somebody say, even if I use English, I'm not being original because I'm using a language other people use. And even if I make up a language, that's not original either because I'm using the basics of what other people have used to make up a language. So it's that idea of there is nothing new under the sun, but at the same time, how can you take certain things that influence you and create a bigger story and your own thing that is very original to you and what you're trying to tell? And so that's where the Bible comes in for one of my main influences. The other one, and Karissa can attest to this because I forced it upon her early on, was Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. It is an anime. It is an anime that I love. And I have read through all the books, the manga, and it is just an amazing story from beginning to end. And the author, who I won't try and attempt her name because I would mess it up really bad. But she created a universe where you care about the characters. There's a really good story format in there. Her art is beautiful, and she's telling a story that matters, and you feel like it matters, and the villains are after the 7 deadly sins, which inspired me because they kind of embody those sins in the manga and in the anime. And so it's just this, wow, you can story tell like this and have influences of these things without having to cut and dry retell a different story. And so that was really exciting to me. And that's always been ever since I saw it. I think I've seen it 7 times now through the anime, which is a ridiculous amount considering there's 66 episodes?
Yeah,
a lot.
something like that.
A lot of episodes. I didn't watch them by myself. I mean, every time it was with somebody different that I was showing it to, so don't think I'm sitting at home watching it over and over.
No, that's what I think about you.
Yeah. I figured.
House all day in the dark with the curtains drawn. Watching Full Metal Alchemist.
So those are the 2 main influences, but there's so many other things that influence, especially Burdens of Draco. At the time, when I was writing it, I was watching Band of Brothers. So that's when a lot of war and that camaraderie of brotherhood came in. I was watching... Oh man, I was playing a lot of Halo at the time, and I had been watching a lot of Destiny videos, which Matt can attest to. Destiny being a big part of our storytelling. That's actually how we met, playing that video game. We met online playing video games. Yes,
So romantic.
It is indeed.
But
well, sometime you should hear the story. It's not as romantic as it sounds.
Don't go there, man.
It was very degrading.
I had to beat that level.
Okay.
A lot of the stories that I really enjoy have a lot to do with a normal person who doesn't have this amazing set of skills trying to achieve something that is way bigger than anything they could do by themselves.
Sure.
And that is Burdens of Draco, and that is so many other great stories. And so...
So I think it's safe to tell all the listeners that issue 2 of Burdens of Draco will be in an entirely new language. Is that what we're saying?
I had to make up a new language for it.
Everybody speaks English, and we want to be unique. And so we created an entirely new language.
I definitely did not understand you completely until I watched through Full Metal Alchemist, and then I went,
yes.
Oh, yeah, okay. And then
So I guess that means I'm going to have to watch it, because I don't think I ever have.
That's a great point right there, because here's a good example. So Finn, everybody seems to love Finn. I can see why. Finn's awesome. Finn, that big, huge blonde guy, is based on 2 different of my main influences. One is Armstrong, of course, He's one of the characters in Full Metal Alchemist, and the other is Samson, who is from the Bible. So that is just showing you that it's an influence. It's not necessarily a complete basis on that. And Finn has a lot of his own character as well. Of course, he's not directly based on either of them. They just influence who he is.
Yeah, and watching it definitely helped shape my character design and my costume design, especially because in addition to never really reading comics, I also have never done anything with science fiction, and I actually don't have any sort of affinity for the science fiction genre. So I'm basically like the least qualified person to be doing this. So just to tie that all in there. But yeah, looking at, because Mica was able to point me towards his influences, then I was able to take those and kind of understand him a little bit better. So speaking to my personal influences in this, I have a really awesomely vague answer, which is that the list of my influences is way too long, and the shorter one is like, what aren't your influences? And the answer is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I have no non-influences.
Nice.
And I was actually thinking today how, like, I wonder if I actually enjoy anything, because I'm always sifting through it and viewing it through my own lenses and trying to figure out like how it applies to the work I'm doing. And I'm suddenly really concerned that like maybe I've never just sat down and had a good time in my whole life.
That's so funny you say that, because ever since I wrote the original script and kind of went through it, like every time I watch a movie, I'm like, oh, they could have done that so much better. Like,
Yes.
that scene was so cringy. Like I see it way more than I used to, of like, oh, they laid that out all wrong. If they would have shot it from this angle, oh man. So funny.
Yeah, that's basically all I do. Like, I just have little, I've got a running list on my phone and like a couple notepads and hundreds of Word documents that are like basically all these breakdowns of movies and games and books and shows and all these things that I've watched. And I'm like, oh, this fits into my universe really well. It's like, it's nonsense.
I think the podcast title is going to end up being awesomely vague.
Yeah, I like that.
Or just interject codex.
The awesomely vague code.
All right, no, we're ejecting him from the interview.
I told you I was going to use the word as often as possible.
Well, you're at like 2 now, so you're not really doing a good job.
Just as a side note, I've never watched Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh yeah, I was going to give a little pitch.
How would you
pitch?
I mean, how would somebody find? Because I just did a quick Google search and there's a ton of stuff. Oh, on Netflix.
Yes, Full Metal Alchemist
It's
Brotherhood
back.
is now on Netflix.
And make sure you do
Cool.
Brotherhood, because there's 2 versions.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of Full Metal Alchemist stuff.
Yeah, the other versions, it's okay, but it does not follow the manga. It starts to, and then it veers quickly in a totally different direction. So
All right. Netflix. So watch
explain-
Netflix.
I don't want to interrupt, Karissa. Were you done with your influence? I don't.
I'm done. Don't worry.
Okay.
She said she had no non-influences.
Oh right,
So I
she
feel
gave
like
an awesomely vague.
awesomely vague.
Yeah, that's usually my awesome vague.
Awesomely vague.
So explain Full Metal in a very short period of time, because I'm always pitching it at people to try and get them to watch it. So it's about 2 brothers in basically a world where alchemy is a big part of their life. It's science, and so alchemy is the process of equal exchange of material matter and element. And so, for instance, if I were to take a wood table, I can turn that into a wood anything as long as it has the same amount of material in it. So I could change it into a wood sword or a wood gun, but the gun wouldn't be able to fire because there's not black powder in wood, if that makes sense. So that idea is how their universes ran. And so basically these boys have a father who's gone, who was an alchemist, left his books behind. They study it. They love it. They are very gifted in it. And then their mother dies. I'm not giving much away. This happens in the first episode. Their mother dies, and they try to bring her back, which the first rule of alchemy, the biggest taboo, is don't perform it on living things. What can equal a soul? Nothing. So they try that. They one of the brothers loses his body. The other one loses his arm, and he drags himself over to a armor suit, and with the sacrifice of his leg, he puts a blood seal on the suit and seals his brother's soul to the suit of armor. So now an empty suit of armor with his brother's soul in it, and him with a metal arm and metal leg go on a journey to get their bodies back. That is the basic idea of the show.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I love it.
All right,
So good.
I'll have to give it a whirl.
Yeah, try it. It's on Netflix. The thing I hear the most from people is it took me a little while to get used to the anime style, and I understand that, but if you understand like that anime style, they're just drawing expressions in a different way than what we're used to as Americans. It's a lot easier to accept. I
would say even for anime, her style is even a little unconventional.
Yeah, it's.
I would say it's actually a little more westernized, I think.
Mm-hmm. It portrays the feelings, though. Like what happens, even though it seems outlandish on some of the expressions they have, you understand exactly what those characters are feeling, and so it's pretty interesting. But
so are you talking an animated? Because on Netflix, there's like a
anime,
real movie looking.
Yes, that is the live action. Don't watch that till you're done.
Yeah, all right.
I did like that, but we don't need to talk about that right now because I could go into it for a while.
Moving on. We'll move on. So if anybody who wants to watch it, you can find it on Netflix.
Yeah. So the last thing is a question from one of our fans, Scott Pinkman. Shout out to Scott for asking a question. Everybody else, shame on you.
Yeah.
Scott. Hopefully next time people understand, like, we're serious. We're going to answer the questions as long as they're not going to spoil anything huge. So Scott asks, I would love to hear some about the inspiration behind the Burdens of Draco universe. Potentially a big question, maybe just some specifics on where you got your ideas for the universe and where you draw your inspiration from for the current and future changes as the series evolves. And I think that is an important thing for me to touch on specifically is Karissa and I have a process. So I've already written all 15 comics as far as the script is concerned. But every single time we touch on a new chapter, we go back through that script and we make the necessary changes and we touch up some things that maybe are off a little bit. And usually we don't have major changes, but we have a lot of minor changes that we put in there to make sure everything flows and that the art matches what needs to be done. And a lot of times, especially in that first issue, there was a whole page that I had written, had pictured in my head, but it just didn't work on the page. So Karissa designed a page of action that made way more sense. And sometimes that's what needs to happen. If I'm so up on my high horse as a writer that I can't let her take control of a page that needs better action sequences, there's an issue. So I understand she understands art better than I do as far as layouts and the way things look and how action is portrayed. And then each chapter, even though it's written, things still influence what we're doing in the current and future changes as the series goes. I don't have anything specific I can name. I don't know if you do.
Well, for the second one?
Yeah, for the one we're about to finish, yeah.
Okay.
What day did you say that was going to be done?
Any day now.
Leave me alone. Oh, I'm so attacked. I
No.
think,
Good.
yeah, well, because chapter 1 was basically all about figuring out what you wanted and then how to go about it and what your influences are, and basically just getting used to everything, and just finding this groove that worked for us. And I don't really know how to explain it, but I guess it was just chapter 1 was all about getting some sort of framework down, like some sort of almost like a syllabus that we could follow. It just felt so like we just had to get some sort of structure down so that we could survive.
Right.
And so I feel like now that that's done, chapter 2 has allowed me to take a lot more of my creative control back. Not that I didn't have any to begin with, but it's like now that that structure is there, I'm able to get a little bit more creative and have a little more freedom. Like, I mean, and I also had so much more time to even just like now that I have a feeling and understanding of all these characters, you know, making those 3D sculpts and getting a feel for them like in the round, and just being able to say like concretely, this is what they look like and this is how I'm going to draw them. And one of the things that you'll notice and why it's taking a little bit more time is that everything's going to have a slightly more realistic feel. I've kind of settled into a good mix of, you know, comic style along with realism. And a large part of that is because I've been able to do these 3D sculpts in the time that we've had. So yes, now that we have a structure down, it's getting a little bit easier to enjoy the process, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I have noticed you don't have the feeling that you have to check in with me a lot like you did with the first one. Like, you know, I trust you to do good stuff, and that if you have a certain opinion of how things should look, you can go ahead and draw it that way. And part of that is because we storyboard before we do anything, which is a part of that structure. But I think that also allows us to have the freedom to, like, I can add some additional dialogue once I see the storyboard and where there's some space, where I can take some out if it's not necessary anymore. But for you in the artwork, it's allowed you to have the freedom to, now that we have that first issue under our belt and you've seen how things have gone, you've had the freedom to really go for it. And I've seen that in the chapter 2 so far. And so to approach the bigger question, which he says it's potentially a big question, and it is, my inspiration behind the Burdens of Draco universe. Now, this is going to sound like it's crazy, but let me expand on it once I say it. I wrote this whole story in like 3 months at 3 to 5 hours a day, nonstop, and it just flowed out of me. And that is not usual writing. That can happen, but a lot of what I have written is still in the story. Now, it's been through like, I've lost count. It's something like 15 edits all the way through. It's ridiculous. And then we re-edit it when we go through the storyboarding process and all that. So it's a lot of edits. So it's had a lot of refining. But that story, the main inspiration was out of this place of, at the time I was in Kansas. I was feeling pretty depressed. I was 12 hours away from home. I was in a pretty hard place of just, it was summer and after 2 years of having summer where you have nothing to do and no one's on campus, it's just like, what am I doing with this time? What am I doing with my life? And I just wasn't feeling great about anything. And so out of this kind of darker place, I just randomly went and grabbed a journal, and that's what came out. I didn't think I was going to write a book and then a comic. It just was. And I know that sounds weird, but that's kind of how it happened. And it's pretty neat. Like, I still have the original script, and I think I've told both Matt and Karissa, it's total trash. It's awful. There's red ink all over it, and I'll hold on to it. I don't think I'll give it to anybody for a long, long time. And when I do,
you wouldn't let me read it.
Have to buy it.
I asked, and you refused.
Yeah, you can't read it. No, I read it not too long ago, a few months ago, and it was embarrassing for me to read. It's so funny how through AJ Ellis, who was the editor for a lot of the series, all of the series, as far as that, I think it was like the 12th edit, but it was the one that really refined everything and made a big difference. But through that, it became such a more molded and like really good story. He really dug into, okay, let's make sure the science of this all works. That's where the physiology and anatomy really came into play, of how they work as beings and all the other stuff that's in there. And he made sure there were no real big plot holes and pitfalls. And like any good storytelling, you can't do it all by yourself. And yes, there's some authors out there that are pretty much one name, churn them out like Stephen King, but that's not a usual thing. And I'm sure he has some help too. I know he has ghostwriters now, but it's an important part to remember if you're writing or working on a project or you want to do a comic. You're not going to do it all by yourself. Even if you're the writer and artist, other people need to pour into it and make it something different. And I think that's one of the things that inspired and has been driven behind the Burdens of Draco universe pretty much since I started, is other people's opinions, other people's thoughts, other people's edits, other people's music, other people's art, other people's writing. It's just, there's so much stuff that I didn't do. And I think that is what is shaping it, is the people that I've been able to bring alongside me that have a passion purely because I've shared my passion with them and they want to help me. And then they get involved and they get excited. And so I'd say that's the best way I can answer that question.
And now we're all trapped here in your world.
I was going to use the word trapped too.
It's so funny. I think, well, I don't know how far it was in there, Matt, but when I sent you all the script stuff on the Google Docs, at some point you're like, I'm scared to know what goes on in Mica's head.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious, but
I just want to really fast. I want to just go back because I know he'll say something to me. But Scott, his last name is pronounced Pinkham.
Pinkham.
Yeah.
Well, Pinkham, your name is spelled different than it sounds.
I gave it. It's spelled Pinkham.
So, I've been misspelling it.
Which I gave him a hard time the first time I met him because it was like pink ham, and so it's ingrained in my head.
Good to know. Well, Scott, I'm sorry I messed it up. Hopefully you forgive me.
He's like our only fan, and you just
no, he's not. Oh my goodness. He is the one. If you've looked through the Facebook feed, he did the T-shirt review. He kind of looks like, he doesn't kind of. He looks lot
exactly like him.
Rick Grimes from Walking Dead.
Oh my gosh, it's insane.
What? That's what it is. I kept thinking he looked familiar.
Andrew Lincoln.
Yeah.
So funny. I had him one time. I recorded him. We do a little nerd con where we get together in Ohio at Matt's house. We've done it a couple times now, and I recorded him on the phone and had him say, "Coral."
What was funny, and this is massively off topic, but in one of our last nerd cons, we ordered pizza, and the girl who delivered the pizza, Scott paid for it, and the girl who delivered the pizza just stood there flabbergasted at the door, and she was just like, I'm not sure if anybody's ever said this to you, but you look just like, she didn't even get the sentence out, and he was like, yeah, I get it all the time. But the pizza lady, the lady who delivered our pizza legit thought that's who it was, and he had to say, no, I'm not him.
Yeah, Andrew Lincoln moved from Great Britain to Ohio.
Yeah, of all the places.
We're not the first people to disappoint him then.
No,
no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well that wraps up our first episode. We're thinking maybe a monthly-ish podcast. We'll see. Mm-hmm. No promises, but if we do another one next time on the podcast, we'll be diving into Chapter 1 spoilers, really going into the process we took together to collaborate in the hidden meanings behind the story and characters and how they influenced and shaped the story and how color and expression played a huge role in storytelling. So we'd like to thank you guys for joining us today. And don't forget to like, share, rate, and tag your friends. Don't rate your friends. Rate this podcast and tag your friends in the podcast. If it wasn't for you guys, we would not have sold almost 500 already. You've helped spread the word, and I hope you continue to do that. It is very difficult to get it out there, so we appreciate any of you, whether you just give it to a friend to borrow or send them the digital copy. Money's nice for us to be able to use to continue on, but if you know someone and they're not sure if they want to buy it or not, let them borrow it. Send it to them. We just want to get it out there. For links to our website and other content, check out the description below. Burdens of Draco is a big passion of ours, and so we just give you a heartfelt thank you for supporting us.